Before we begin, if you are someone who seeks truth beyond comfort, if you believe history is not just stories but warnings, then stay with this journey till the end. And if this kind of deep, reality-shaking content speaks to you, consider subscribing, because what you are about to hear is not just history, it is a mirror. There is a pattern so old that it stretches across civilizations, across languages, across generations. A voice rises, a warning is given, truth is spoken clearly, fearlessly, and then it is ignored. Not because it was unclear, not because it lacked evidence, but because it was inconvenient. This is the story of voices that were not silenced by weakness but by rejection. From the Torah, the stories of prophets like Elijah, who stood alone against entire nations drowning in corruption. From the Bible, the accounts of messengers who warned kings, challenged societies, and were mocked, hunted, and abandoned. From the Quran, the repeated declaration that no nation was destroyed until a warner was sent and rejected. The message is consistent. Truth was never absent. It was refused. Imagine a society, thriving on the outside, markets busy, cities expanding, power increasing, but inside, morality is collapsing, justice is selective, truth becomes uncomfortable, and then a voice appears. Not a king, not a general, not a wealthy elite, but someone, carrying a message that cuts through illusion. This is where our story begins. There was a time when people no longer wanted to hear truth. Not because truth disappeared, but because repetition had made it easy to ignore. This is what we call today warning fatigue. At first, warnings shake people. They create fear. They trigger reflection. But over time, when warnings are repeated and consequences are delayed, people begin to normalize them. They say things like, "We have heard this before. Nothing happened last time. Why should it matter now?" And slowly the warning loses its weight. Not because it became weaker, but because hearts became harder. The Quran describes this pattern repeatedly. Nations were warned again and again. Prophets came one after another, each one saying the same core message: return to truth, abandon injustice, prepare for accountability. But instead of listening, people developed resistance. They didn't just ignore the message, they rejected the messenger. Let us step into one of these moments. A land once guided by prophets now drifting into corruption. Leaders chasing power, people chasing desires, truth becoming rare. And then rises a man known not for wealth but for conviction. This was Prophet Elijah. He stood before his people not with an army, but with certainty. He called them out, not gently, not vaguely, but directly. Why do you worship what cannot help you? Why do you abandon truth for comfort? But here is the reality. When truth confronts comfort, comfort fights back. The people did not respond with reflection. They responded with resistance. They mocked him. They dismissed him. They labeled him as extreme. Does this sound familiar? This is not just history. This is a cycle. Elijah was not rejected because he was unclear. He was rejected because he was clear. Too clear. And clarity threatens illusion. In the Bible, Elijah stands against false prophets. Hundreds of them. A single man against a system. And yet the people hesitated. Even when truth was visible, they delayed accepting it. Why? Because accepting truth requires change. And change is uncomfortable. The Torah also reflects this pattern. Warnings were given to nations again and again. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. And every time, the same response appeared. Delay, denial, dismissal. Now pause. Think about this carefully. If truth is repeated and people still ignore it, what changes? The truth. or the people. This is where warning fatigue becomes dangerous. Because it creates a false sense of safety. People begin to believe, if nothing has happened yet nothing will happen. But history tells a different story. Consequences do not always come immediately. But when they come, they do not come weak. Let us move deeper. Another voice rises. Another prophet, Elisha. A continuation of the same mission. A continuation of the same warning. But something has changed. Not the message, not the truth, but the audience. They have heard it before. They are used to it. And that is exactly why it no longer affects them. This is one of the most dangerous states a society can reach. Not ignorance, but desensitization. Because ignorance can be corrected. But desensitization rejects correction. Elisha performs signs. Clear signs. Not hidden, not ambiguous. Yet the reaction remains the same. Some believe, but many turn away. And here lies a painful reality. Truth does not fail because it lacks strength. It fails in the eyes of people, because they choose not to see. The Quran highlights this repeatedly. There were signs, clear signs, but people called them magic, called them coincidence, called them irrelevant. This is not a lack of evidence. This is a refusal to accept evidence. Now let us connect this to something deeper. Every empire that collapsed did not collapse suddenly. It collapsed internally first. Moral authority declined. Truth became negotiable. Warnings were ignored. And slowly, the foundation weakened. From the outside, everything looked stable. But inside, decay had already begun. This is the parallel we must understand. The rejection of prophets was never just a religious issue. It was a societal issue. A civilizational issue. Because when truth is rejected, everything else follows. Justice becomes selective. Power becomes abusive. Wealth becomes corrupting. And slowly, the system begins to eat itself. This is exactly what happened in many ancient civilizations. Not because they lacked strength, but because they lost direction. And every time, there was a moment, a window, where they could have changed. But they didn't. Why? Because the voices that warned them were ignored. And here is the question you must ask yourself. Not about them, but about us. If the same pattern exists today, if warnings are still being given, if truth is still present, then what are we doing differently? Or are we repeating the same cycle? Think about it. How many times have you heard something that you knew was true, but chose to ignore, not because you didn't understand it, but because accepting it would require change? This is where the real story begins. Not in the past, but in the present. Because the prophets are not here anymore. But the pattern is. Now we go deeper. Because ignoring truth is not accidental. It is a process. A psychological transformation. A slow shift where people begin to protect their comfort more than reality. Let us break this illusion. At the beginning, when a warning is first heard, it creates discomfort. It shakes something inside. A question arises. What if this is true? But instead of exploring that question, people look for escape. And the easiest escape is doubt. Not genuine doubt, but convenient doubt. They begin to say, maybe he is exaggerating. Maybe this is not for us. Maybe things are not that bad. This is the first stage. Minimization. The message is not rejected directly. It is reduced, made smaller, less urgent, less important. But when the warning continues, when the voice does not disappear, something else happens. The second stage begins. Ridicule. Now the message is not just minimized. It is mocked. The prophets in history were not only ignored, they were laughed at. In the Quran we Find this pattern again and again. Messengers were called names. They were labeled as mad, as liars, as extremists. Why? Because ridicule is a defense mechanism. If you can make something look foolish, you don't have to take it seriously. Think about it. When someone challenges your lifestyle, your habits, your beliefs, it is easier to mock them than to question yourself. And this is exactly what societies did. Prophet Elijah faced this. Standing against false worship, he was not treated as a reformer. He was treated as a threat. Because truth always threatens systems built on falsehood. And systems do not collapse quietly. They resist. Now we move to the third stage. Reframing. This is where things become dangerous. Because now, the narrative itself is changed. The one who speaks truth is presented as the problem. Not the corruption, not the injustice, not the decay, but the one who points it out. This is not just rejection. This is inversion. Right becomes wrong. Wrong becomes right. And once this inversion is accepted by the majority, truth becomes isolated. This is exactly what happened to many prophets. In the Bible we see prophets warning kings, calling out injustice, demanding accountability. But instead of reform, the kings turned the narrative. They painted the prophets as rebels, as troublemakers, as destabilizers, and the people followed that narrative because it was easier. Let us pause here. If a society begins to see truth as a threat, and falsehood as stability, what happens next? Collapse. But not immediately, because there is still one more stage. The final stage, normalization. At this point, the warning is no longer shocking. It is no longer debated. It is simply ignored, completely. People hear it, and feel nothing. No fear, no reflection, no urgency. This is the death of sensitivity. And once a society reaches this stage, it becomes almost impossible to reverse. Because now, even clear signs do not create change. This is what happened in the time of Prophet Elisha. Signs were shown, miracles occurred, truth was visible, but the reaction, indifference, and indifference, is more dangerous than rejection. Because rejection still acknowledges something exists. Indifference pretends nothing exists at all. Now let us connect this to something deeper. Leadership. Because societies do not collapse alone. They are led into collapse. When prophets warned, they were not just addressing people. They were addressing systems, power structures, authority, control. And here lies a critical point. Leaders benefit from stability, even if that stability is built on falsehood. Because truth demands change, and change threatens power. So what do leaders do? They control the narrative. They amplify voices that support them, and silence voices that challenge them. Not always with force, but with influence. They shape what people see, what people hear, what people believe, and slowly, truth becomes a minority. This is not ancient history. This is a pattern. Empires that fell did not fall because enemies were strong. They fell because truth was weak inside them. Moral authority collapsed, integrity disappeared, warnings were ignored, and when the external threat finally came, the empire was already broken. From the inside, look at any major collapse in history. You will find the same sequence. Corruption increases, warnings appear, warnings are ignored, decay spreads, collapse follows, not instantly, but inevitably. And here is the most chilling part. During the decay, people believe everything is fine. Because from the outside, nothing seems wrong. Markets are active, cities are growing, technology is advancing, but inside, the foundation is cracking. This is exactly what warning fatigue creates. A false sense of security. People begin to think, if we were really in danger, something would have happened by now. But they forget, consequences are not always immediate. They build, slowly, silently, until one day, they are unavoidable. Now let us bring this to you. Not as a distant story, but as a present reality. How many warnings exist today? About morality, about justice, about truth. How many voices are speaking? And more importantly, how many are being ignored? Think about the information you consume. Are you hearing truth, or comfort? Are you being challenged, or entertained? Because there is a difference. And that difference decides the direction of a society. Now ask yourself something deeper. If a prophet stood today, with the same message, the same clarity, the same warnings, how would people react? Would they listen, or would they repeat the same cycle? Minimize, mock, reframe, ignore. This is not a question about the past. It is a question about us. Because the pattern has not changed. Only the context has. Every prophet who warned did not just bring a message. They brought a window of time, a chance to return, a chance to correct, a chance to step away from the path of destruction. But when that window is ignored, it does not stay open forever. The Quran describes this with a powerful reality. No nation is seized suddenly, until it has been warned. Clearly, repeatedly, and once that threshold is crossed, the outcome becomes inevitable. But here is what makes it terrifying. The people do not realize it. Even at the edge of collapse, they believe they are safe. Let us step into this moment. A society that has heard every warning, seen every sign, rejected every voice. Outwardly, nothing seems wrong. Life continues. Markets run. Leaders speak with confidence. People plan their futures. But something has changed. Not outside, inside. The moral compass is gone. Truth is no longer the standard. Convenience is. Justice is no longer a principle. It is a tool. And when this shift becomes complete, collapse is no longer a possibility. It is a certainty. History gives us glimpses of this. Communities that reached a point where even the righteous felt outnumbered. Voices became fewer. Resistance became harder. But even then, there were always some who listened. This is an important reality. Not everyone rejects truth. Even in the darkest societies, there are individuals who feel the weight of it. People who hear the warning, and it unsettles them. They cannot ignore it completely. These are the ones who stand at the edge of a decision. To follow the majority, or to follow the truth. And this decision is never easy, because following truth often comes with a cost. Isolation, mockery, loss. This is what prophets faced. And this is what their followers faced. Because truth does not always come with comfort. But here is the difference. Those who accept truth early experience discomfort now, but safety later. Those who reject truth experience comfort now, but regret later. This is the trade, always. Now let us talk about the moment of consequence. It does not always look like what people expect. It is not always sudden destruction. Not always visible disaster. Sometimes, it is a slow unraveling. Systems begin to fail. Trust begins to disappear. Leadership becomes unstable. And people start asking, what went wrong? But by that time, the answer has already been given. Many times, it was ignored. This is what happened to many past civilizations. They did not collapse because they lacked intelligence, or resources, or strength. They collapsed because they ignored truth. Because they normalized corruption. Because they silenced warnings. Because they chose comfort over correction. And when the final stage came, they were unprepared. This is the ultimate consequence of warning fatigue. Not just ignoring truth, but losing the ability to respond to it. Now pause. Take this out of history. Bring it into your life. How many warnings have you heard? Not from prophets, but from reality itself. Moments where something felt wrong. Choices that didn't sit right. Paths that you knew were leading somewhere dangerous. And yet, you continued. Not because you didn't know, but because stopping was difficult. This is the same pattern. On a smaller scale. And just like societies, individuals also reach thresholds. Points where change becomes harder. Where habits become stronger. Where ignoring truth becomes easier than facing it. But here is the hope. Unlike past nations, your story is still unfolding. The window is still open. And this is the most important part of this entire journey. The purpose of these stories is not to scare you. It is to wake you up. Because history is not just a record. It is a warning system. And warnings are only valuable if they are acted upon. Now let us return to the prophets. Why were their stories preserved? Why do the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran all repeat these patterns? Because the message is not time-bound. It is human-bound. As long as humans exist, this cycle will exist. Voices will rise. Truth will be spoken. Warnings will be given. And people will choose to listen or to ignore. And that choice will define their outcome. Now here is the final question. Not about them. Not about history. About you. When truth comes to you, in whatever form, will you recognize it? Or will you delay, dismiss, and eventually ignore it? Because the difference between survival and regret has always been this simple. Listening, before it is too late. Before we end, if this journey made you think, if it made you question things you usually ignore, then do not let it stop here. Subscribe to Son of Adam. Because these are not just stories. They are warnings we cannot afford to miss. And share this message, because sometimes, a single reminder can change someone's direction. In the end, the prophets delivered their message. Clearly, completely. The question was never, was the truth given? The question has always been, was it accepted? And that is a question every generation must answer.